Good morning. Let's get started with today's episode. Jen Abbott, my co-host, is joining us. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you, Kate. Good morning.
Good morning. We are very lucky today to be speaking with Graeme Innes. Graeme is a lawyer, author, and disability representative. He has his own company and he's written a book called Finding a Way, which achieved popular acclaim in 2016. Welcome, Graeme.
Thanks very much. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much. You've got a beautiful family, two children. You love cricket as a spectator and sailing as a participant, and you relax by enjoying fine Australian white wine. My
Man up
is
my own
with you.
heart.
Yes, yes. Can you tell us a little bit about how your interest in disability started?
Well, I was born blind, and so I was likely to have an interest from that perspective. And I was always encouraged by my parents to aspire to do whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
And I met a number of blind people as a teenager and young adult, who I saw out in the world working, doing what they wanted to do, going to university, and living the lives they chose. And that inspired me to have those approaches as well. And my first piece of advocacy was in regard to getting access to material in alternate formats when I was starting at university. And the Royal Blind Society in New South Wales, now Vision Australia, didn't have a student support unit at that stage, and a few of us advocated to get that started and have it developed. So I started advocacy for myself, but realised that there was a much broader perspective, and moved on from there. In 1981, I had the opportunity to go to the first International Assembly of Disabled Peoples International, and met a whole lot of disability advocates from around the world there. And at that stage, we didn't have a disability advocacy movement as such in Australia. And I and a few others came back with the aim of beginning that movement in Australia. And so I was the first chair of DPI, which was the Australian branch of Disabled Peoples International, which eventually became People with Disabilities Australia.
Wonderful. So I love the fact that you've taken, you've progressed yourself and you've gone out yourself to support yourself and advocate for yourself, especially in the younger years. With that, did you ever feel stuck or limited by your circumstances growing up?
Uh, I was always brought up to, as I said, have the view that I could do anything that I wanted to.
Yeah.
So the first time I really hit a wall, it wasn't to do with my disability. It was to do with negative assumptions about my disability. Was
Yeah.
when I had finished my university degree and applied for a job, and most employers couldn't understand how a blind person could operate as a lawyer. And obviously, we can, and there are numerous examples of that in Australia and around the world. But I couldn't convince employers that I could do that, despite at the end of every interview uh, saying that I wanted to talk about that I knew that they would be concerned on this issue, and I wanted to talk about how I would deal with it. And after 30 interviews unsuccessful, in about a 12 months period, I decided I had to find another way around this problem.
Mhm.
And so I applied for the to do the clerical exam and became a clerical assistant in the New South Wales Public Service. And I experienced what many people with disabilities experience, that I was the only lawyer in the New South Wales Public, sorry, I was the only clerical assistant in the New South Wales Public Service with a law degree. And I discovered that I had to go on this journey that many of us with disabilities have to, and that is to be employed under under our qualifications at a level lower than our qualifications and work our way up, prove ourselves the whole time. And that's the journey that a lot of people with disabilities have to take, not because of our disability, but because of the limiting and negative assumptions that are made about us by most members in society.
And I think that's the key, isn't it? It's the assumptions that people put on people, and that's in general. So it's definitely hard out there for people with a disability, but showing that grit and that determination is key, to be seen. And I think that's really important to never give up. And
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, but it is important. And there's no point shying away from it. As people with disabilities, we will be, um, these assumptions will be made about us. So if we're going to be successful, we are going to have to work harder than most other people to achieve what we want to achieve.
yeah, yeah.
How do you, and it's really interesting that you say that, because the other people that we have interviewed have very much said exactly the same thing. It's the environment that disables them more, or the assumptions than actually their disability. You've
Yep.
obviously found you've worked really hard and been very supported, I'm assuming, by your parents growing up. How could we change that how do we change that for the future, so people are not more disabled by their environment and by the assumptions?
So this sounds a bit simplistic, but we change it by changing it, because you cannot be what you cannot see. And women had this experience 30 or 40 years ago, where they weren't seen in senior leadership roles and in particular professions. People from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds have experienced it and still experience it, and people with disabilities experience it. So we change it by changing it, because all of us who recognise that belief has to change, we need to implement things in our organisations and our lives, to demonstrate the effectiveness of people with disabilities. I've been campaigning for many years for disability support organisations to employ people with disabilities, because we're underemployed in those organisations as a start. So the first question that I ask any group of disability support organisations is, how many people with disabilities do you employ? And if they don't employ more than 20%, which is the general figure in the population, then they're not doing their job. They might be supporting people with disabilities very effectively, but they're not empowering people with disabilities very effectively, and that needs to change. And the disability sector is the best place to change it, because we know of the abilities of people with disabilities. So you change it by changing it.
Yeah.
So as an employer, and I love what you say, I actually wrote it down: you cannot be what you cannot see.
Yep.
That's really, really eye-opening for me. As an employer, how do we do that? How do we cater for disability? Is it disability specific? Is it general?
Well, inherent in your question is an assumption that it'll be harder to employ people with disabilities, and it's not. So it's all about the mindset. It's all about finding the right person for a job, or it's all about shaping your employment processes so that you can employ people with disabilities. I was talking to a group of blind people just about a few months ago, and they told me that in 90% of jobs these days require a driving license, someone to hold a driving license. And when you analyse the requirements within those jobs, a driving license is not necessary, but it's put as a requirement of those jobs. And of course, that just immediately excludes people who don't have a driving license, such as blind people. Now, if the job is that of a truck driver or a courier, then I would say, okay, you probably need a driving license for that. But if the job is that of someone who has to go out and visit people in their homes, you don't need a driving license for that. You just need a means of carrying out that travel. In other words, putting that driving license requirement on that job is excluding people with disabilities. So as an employer, you have to look at what it is that you're doing to exclude people with disabilities and take those things out of the way. There are a whole lot of programs. There's the Disability Employment Program, which provides equipment and support for people with disabilities to get into jobs. So it's funded by federal government. Most of the time, 90% of the extra cost of employing a person with a disability is less than $500. And that cost is covered by federal government anyway. And so all of the research, all of the myths amongst employers have to be challenged. For instance, the first myth is that people with disabilities get sick more often, so take more sick leave. Not true. Research demonstrates that's not the case. The second one is that we make more workers' compensation claims. Again, not true. We're actually safer operators because we understand the issues that relate to our disability, and we have ways of getting around them. And the third assumption is that we won't stay in a job as long. In fact, we stay longer because it's harder for us to get jobs. We know how hard it is, so we make damn sure that we stay in a job once we get it. And we are actually better managers. And that's not surprising when you think about the fact that people with disabilities live every day with managing the impact of their disability and the impact that society forces on them because of their disability. And so we're better at dealing with those situations. We're better at problem solving. We're better at managing, et cetera, et cetera. So once you take those myths out of the equation, there's no good reason for employers not to employ people with disabilities. In fact, there's a whole lot of good reasons why employers should.
Yeah, and it does come down to the commitment, the resilience, the determination, and that's key for any employer looking at hiring an employee. Let's be honest.
You want that. You want
that grit, it's an absolute fair point. Absolutely. And it'll make me look at things a little bit different. And we are very inclusive, because we look at it, what the job entails rather than, the fluffy stuff around, it's more about the wants and the needs. You've got to weigh all that up at the end of the day.
And I love the fact, Graeme, that you just put me in my spot, because I hadn't have thought of it like that, but you are 100% correct. I, again, made assumptions that were probably not correct.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that to my attention, because it means that I need to maybe, and not change my mindset, but I need to look at the other side of it.
We all have inherent biases, and they're built in by society's practices. So society teaches us. I mean, kids don't have these biases until they go to school, and then society teaches us all these biases. I mean, we exclude kids with disabilities from regular schools. So what message is that sending to the other kids? It's sending a message that people with disabilities are different, or they won't be able to be successful in the regular educational environment. And so those messages just get reinforced from when we're kids. So it's not surprising we'll make those negative assumptions, but we have to challenge those biases.
And that's really why we're hoping having these conversations, especially with someone like you who has, a whole lifetime of experiences, we can start to actually quash some of these misassumptions.
Yep.
Can you tell me about a time when things didn't go? I mean, you have already talked about applying for 30 jobs and not getting them, and that's awful. What made you keep going?
Because I had a fundamental belief that I could aspire to and succeed at what I wanted to. And I had studied for 4 years to become a lawyer. I'd worked hard at that. I knew I could do the job. It was just a matter of changing other people's minds. And so I had to find a different way around the problem. And it's why I've called my book Finding a Way, because that's what blind people and people with disabilities have to do all through our lives. We have to find a way to surmount the barriers that society places in front of us.
Yeah. And
And
find a way to be heard, find your
Yeah.
voice. And
Yeah.
it's all
Well, yeah.
encompassing, isn't it, at the end of the day? It's,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a sporting expression that elite sports people find a way. They find a way to win. And that's what people with disabilities need to do. We have to find a way.
yep.
where did you get that mindset? Was
From my
that
parents.
from your parents? Can you
Yep.
tell me a little bit about your parents and how they coped? And because obviously it's I'm not going to say soul destroying or shattering, but it's a journey that as a parent I've been on, that you go through, and there is a grieving process of the life that you thought your child was going to have, and then you've got this disability and you've got to change your mindset. Tell me a little bit about your parents.
You see, in your last couple of sentences, you've just reinforced a whole lot of negative assumptions about people with disabilities. You talk about parents needing to cope. You talk about, the challenges that they're going to face. My parents took the view that they had three kids. I was the middle child, and that they raised us as three children. So the focus wasn't on the disability. The focus was on raising three children in a family, expecting me to contribute to the family in the same way as my sister and brother, and working with me to find ways that I could do that, but having that continued expectation. And so I learned as part of the family unit that I could make a contribution whenever the family, and we did a lot of stuff as a family. My parents had a view that we had a community obligation to support other people in the community who might be more disadvantaged than us, and so we did a lot of work supporting charities and that sort of thing. And it was always a family activity, and we did that as a family. And you know, both I and my parents found ways for me to be part of that process. So I just lived the first 20 or so years of my life expecting to do the same thing as my siblings. And so that expectation was with me. And as I said, the first time I hit these societal barriers was when I applied for a job. And so my default position was, oh, okay, I need to find a different way to solve this problem. This is just a challenge that I need to overcome.
And so it's therefore not a point that you can't do it. It's that
No.
you need to do it differently.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. And so it's really important for parents of kids with disabilities I think, to take that approach, that it's not, as you said, a question of their child, because of their disability, they can't do things. It's because of their disability, they need to do things differently. And once you come from that different mindset, it makes a huge amount of difference.
So are you saying then that it's really the parents also that need to change their mindset to be a role model for their children?
Well, parents are members of society, and society has this mindset that we need to change. So, the way to start that change is for, parents to have a different mindset, for people with disabilities to have a different mindset. And it's amazing when you change that mindset, how much difference it can make. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should be impractical about this. There will be issues that a person with a disability will face that have to be dealt with differently as a result of their disability. I'm never going to get a driver's license, although I can't wait for self-drive cars, because that will make a huge difference that will give me even more independence than I now have. Yeah. So, if I need to move around independently, then I need to find other ways to do it. So rideshare, taxis, walking, public transport, there are all sorts of when you start to think outside the box about those sorts of challenges, then it's amazing. And when your approach is solutions focused, it's amazing how many solutions you can come up with.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, that is a really good point, isn't it? Be solution based.
Yeah.
Just,
Well, yeah, solution focused. I mean, you need to be, there are things that all of us run into in life, which are challenges, and we either find a way around them or we don't. If you
yeah,
want to be successful, then you find a way around them.
that's absolutely true. Absolutely.
Sometimes the world can be slow to catch up to the needs and the normality of people with a disability.
No, I agree. Yeah.
What what changes would you like to see?
I'd like to see the attitude in society about disability change because that will have such a flow-on effect to other issues. Um, so all of those negative assumptions that I've talked about being made, I'd like to see those changed. The first one is in regard to education. So kids with disabilities should be educated at regular schools. How can we expect people with disabilities to succeed in society if we segregate them for the first 18 years of their lives? I understand why a lot of parents do it because they're thinking about the safety of their children. And so a special school seems like a safe environment. In fact, special schools are not as safe as regular schools, and the research supports that. And the learning outcomes for kids with disabilities at special schools are less than they are for kids with disabilities at regular schools. And thirdly, we're reinforcing the negative assumption about people with disabilities because we're separating them. So and I'm a parent, so I can speak with experience in our attempt to keep our child safe by sending them to a special school. We're sending them to a less safe environment. We're giving them lower learning outcomes, and we're reducing their chances of being successful as adults. So I understand why parents do it. I understand the school system pushes parents to do it, but bottom line is it's going to create a worse outcome for their child.
And whilst I said I didn't want to get involved in politics and everything else, I absolutely agree with what you say. How do we make that happen? Because a lot of this, for me, comes down to money and the support's not being in the education department, whether that's the funding, whether I don't know what that is. How do we make it happen?
Well, we make it happen by, as parents, demanding regular education for our kids with disabilities. I mean, if the money that was spent on special schools was moved into the regular education system, we'd have a lot more funding for the supports that people with disabilities need. Now, I'm not saying you close them all down tomorrow. Of course, you couldn't do that. You've got to phase out this system. But we have to stop running separate parallel systems in our society for people with disabilities. Because what special schools do, to use Catherine McAlpine's expression, and she's the CEO of Inclusion Australia, they're a polished pathway to sheltered workshops. They're a polished pathway to segregated employment for people with disabilities, because that's where they point to. That's where they send people with disabilities. So we have to, as a society, change that by sending fewer and fewer kids to special schools and by eventually, or segregated schools, and by eventually sending all the kids to regular schools. And then we support adults with disabilities into open employment.
Yeah. And I
What
mean, the way forward for that would be, yeah, less segregation, less discrimination, more empathy and more compassion, and more love for everyone and their uniqueness, really.
Yeah,
Because
I
you
mean,
are right, if we segregate and we show that, you know, in the world of, normal society. They're different, and they're not different.
No.
They're
Well,
not at all.
well,
We
we are
all,
different. All humans are different. All
and
humans have
that's
their
the
different
and that's the
strengths and
thing.
yeah,
Yeah, everyone's normal for their own purpose. Like my normal is not the same as yours nor Kate's, and that's in general right across the board. So it's just about, loving everyone for who they are and accepting them for who they are, I think, and
yeah.
that's the key.
So I would say what's normal? Normal's just a setting on the washing machine. That's all it is.
And even then, that's,
So everyone is different. There's
Mm,
no if we and I mean, you see, we're taught as a society to relate to our tribes,
yep,
and so we our tribes might be and that is the underlying effect of the racism that occurs in our society and the cultural difference. But we all know that diverse societies work far more effectively, um, and that diversity includes people with disabilities.
yes, absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, we all bleed red. And we all have feelings and emotions, and we
Yep,
need to get back to the bare basics
yep.
of humanity, really.
Yep, yep. And there's all the research, for instance, on boards of directors running companies shows that boards which include diversity, include women directors, include people with disabilities, are more effective operating boards because they represent that breadth of lived experience in the society. So why wouldn't we apply that model across the board?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Question for you, Graeme, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think I might. What would
Oh,
you
please do.
say? What would you say to all these parents in a classroom that say my child shouldn't be disadvantaged by having children with disabilities in the classroom?
Oh, I'd say you're absolutely right. Your child should not be disadvantaged. So we need to resource the education system so that every child is supported to attend regular schools.
Yeah.
And if that means that there needs to be supports for children with disabilities, then they should be provided. So it's not a question of your child without a disability being disadvantaged. It's a question of increasing the resources, increasing the skill set of the teachers and the support staff through better training, and recognising that including people with disabilities in regular schools is a reflection of broad society. 20% of people in Australia are people with disabilities. So if you think of a bus load of 50 people, 10 people on that bus should be people with disabilities. At the moment, that's perhaps not the case because we're segregated, and it's harder for us to break into those societies. So, but that should be the way it is, and so our society needs to be representative of that.
I
Yeah.
love that answer. Great answer.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who feels like their disability is holding them back?
Well, I'd say that some of that is in your hands to change. So you can't change everything. You can't change all of society, but you can change the way that you operate and the way that people around you operate. And so, change the things you can. Change your approach to disability. Aspire to do the things you want to. Don't feel limited by your disability, because you making that change and encouraging your family and friends to make that change will support the broader societal change that we all need to make.
Yeah.
I love that response.
Yeah.
That's great. As we start to wrap up, what are your hopes for the future, Graeme, both for yourself and for society and how they embrace people with disabilities?
Well, we need to see more people with disabilities on our television screens, in our leadership roles, in our parliament, in our government, and in jobs. So my hopes are that in 10 or 20 years, we live in a society where the newsreader comes on set and we comment about the colour choice of the tie he wears rather than the fact that he uses a wheelchair. I believe that technology can make a huge difference for people with disabilities. I firmly believe that in 4 or 5 years, I'll be traveling independently in a car because our cars will be self-driven. And we know that self-drive cars are going to be much safer on the roads than having the human error that we do currently live with, and the road accidents that causes. So technology will make a difference, but really the big change is the societal change. And my dreams for both myself and for the broader community are that disability just becomes recognised as part of the human condition and as part of the broad sweep of the broad diversity of society, so that it's not focused on as a negative, that it's not focused on much at all. It's observed, but we've removed those barriers in society and we've employed people with disability at the equivalent rate. At the moment, it's 30% lower than the general population. So we've gained the benefit of the contribution of those people with disabilities to our society, and our society is more successful as a result.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that answer, Graeme, and that's really something that we all have to think about moving forward. Have you got any more questions, Jen?
I just think I've always been very inclusive and open-minded with everyone. I treat people how I'm treated, and it's all about respect and respecting others. But
Yep.
speaking with you today has really opened my eyes that I still have a long way to go, and I am very inclusive and accepting of all. And that's been a very big eye-opener for me. So I wanted to thank you for that, because there are certain things that I can instill in my children still to this day after speaking with you, to make them better humans and more accepting. And I'm not taking away that they are. They're very inclusive because that's how my husband and I have raised them. But I think speaking with you and opening my eyes a little bit more today is going to be so beneficial for not only my family and my children, but for the greater community. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with us, because it has benefited me a lot, and I'm sure it will benefit our listeners as well. So I do
Well,
think.
thanks, Jen. I think aspiring to be better humans even doesn't mean we're bad humans. It just
No,
means that we can be better. I think
absolutely.
aspiring to be better humans is really important, and recognizing that we all have inherent biases.
Yep.
So I regard myself as someone who's pretty inclusive too, but I still catch myself out saying things in a way that wouldn't include people, and or doing things in a way, and so I need to correct that. And so that's what you're talking about, and it's a pleasure to
Absolutely.
talk with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I love the fact, Graeme, that you say it about yourself as well. And maybe that's something we all need to do,
Oh
is be
yeah.
very aware of
Yeah.
what is coming out of our mouth, of what is going through our mind, and think before we actually speak.
Yeah.
Just be
Or
more
act.
aware.
I mean, I always say to people that the most powerful words you can say to a person with a disability is "you start on Monday." In other words,
Mm.
one of the ways of demonstrating our keenness to change the world around disability is to employ a person with a disability. So, being the change you want to see in the world.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Graeme. It's been amazing to speak to you. Thank you for giving
Absolute pleasure.
Not a problem. Good to talk with you both.
I will be putting your details on social media. We'll advertise your book. So if anyone would like to reach out to you, they will have your details.
Yep, that's fine. And when you put the podcast up, if you let me know, where it can be reached, then I will put it on my social media as well.
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
Thank
We've
you so
loved
much.
sharing today's show with you. Have a wonderful day, and we will speak to you all on the next show.